The evening sun was slowly sinking behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was thick with humidity, a typical summer day in this small suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped lazily as they prepared to settle into their nests for the night. Somewhere nearby, kids laughed while playing hide-and-seek under the fading light. It seemed like just another peaceful evening. A young woman sat on her porch, rocking gently on an old wooden chair. She had a book open, on her lap, but wasn't really reading it. Her mind wandered as she watched the world go by, cars passing, neighbors chatting, and dogs barking in the distance. This was her favorite time of day, when everything slowed down after the chaos of work. For a moment, life felt simple and perfect, but then came the buzz, that high-pitched whine that no one can ignore. At first, she didn't pay much attention. Mosquitoes were part of living in this area during the summer months. Everyone dealt with them. It was just something you learned to live with. But tonight, there was one particularly persistent little bugger circling her head. She swatted at the air absent-mindedly, trying to shoo it away without looking up from her book. "Go bother someone else," she muttered under her breath, laughing softly at how silly it sounded talking to a mosquito. But the buzzing continued, louder now, almost taunting her. Finally, she gave up pretending to read and focused on chasing the pest away. And then it happened. A sharp pinch on her ankle made her yelp. She glanced down and saw the tiny culprit retreating, its body gorged with blood. A bright red welt already began forming where it had bitten her. Sighing, she scratched at the spot absent-mindedly before going back to her book. Just another mosquito bite, she thought, dismissing it instantly. Bites like these were nothing new. Everyone got them during the summer. They itched for a day or two, maybe left a little mark, but that was about it. No big deal. She'd had far worse over the years, bites that turned into swollen lumps or ones that refused to stop itching for days. Compared to those, this one seemed pretty mild. As darkness fell completely, crickets took over the soundtrack of the evening, replacing the earlier hum of cicadas. Inside, the house grew quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She stretched lazily, closed her book, and headed inside, locking the door behind her. After brushing her teeth and changing into comfortable pajamas, she climbed into bed, pulling the sheet up to her chin. Her thoughts drifted to random things, the projects she needed to finish at work, the grocery list she kept forgetting to write, the vacation she hoped to take someday. Sleep crept in quickly, wrapping her in its warm embrace. By the time her head hit the pillow, the mosquito bite on her ankle was completely forgotten. Little did she know, though, that deep beneath her skin, something was happening. The insect's saliva, carrying invisible invaders, had entered her bloodstream along with its meal. These microscopic hitchhikers weren't supposed to be there, and they wouldn't stay dormant for long. While she slept peacefully, unaware of the danger lurking inside her body, the clock started ticking toward something far more serious than anyone could have imagined. Outside, the mosquitoes continued their nightly hunt, drawn by the warmth and carbon dioxide humans exhaled. To them, it was survival. To us, it was just another annoyance of summer. But sometimes those tiny bites carried consequences far greater than we ever anticipated. It was early morning and sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, casting golden streaks across the room. The young woman stirred slightly in her bed, groggy and disoriented. Something felt off. Her body seemed heavier than usual. Like dragging herself out of bed would require monumental effort. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness, but even that small action made her head throb. At first, she figured it was just fatigue catching up with her. Work had been hectic lately, and staying up late reading hadn't helped. Maybe she was coming down with a cold. She'd felt a little under the weather the past couple of days. Nothing serious, though. Or so she thought. She sat up cautiously, rubbing her temples to ease the dull ache pulsing behind her forehead. That's when she noticed how warm she felt. Not just warm, hot. Her skin prickled with heat, and yet strangely enough, goosebumps raced along her arms. Confused, she reached for the thermometer on her bedside table. Slipping it under her tongue, she waited impatiently, staring at the ceiling as sweat beaded on her brow. When the thermometer beeped, she looked at the result. 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Fever. A wave of unease washed over her. This wasn't normal. Sure, people got fevers all the time, but hers had come out of nowhere. Just yesterday, she'd been fine. Or at least she thought she had been. Now her whole body felt wrong, as if some invisible force were draining her, energy bit by bit. Deciding to push through, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and planted her feet on the floor. Big mistake. Dizziness hit her instantly, making the room spin. She gripped the edge of the mattress tightly, waiting for the world to steady itself. When it finally did, she stood up carefully, moving like an old person afraid of falling. Every step toward the kitchen felt like trudging through quicksand. Her roommate, who happened to walk into the living room just then, stopped dead in their tracks. "Whoa," they said, concern etched across their face. "You look terrible." "Thanks," she muttered sarcastically, leaning heavily against the counter. Her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "No, seriously," the roommate pressed, stepping closer. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "I don't know," she admitted, shaking her head. "I woke up feeling awful. Headache, fever." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how flushed her cheeks must look. Her throat felt scratchy too, like sandpaper rubbing together every time she swallowed. The roommate placed a hand on her forehead. "You're burning up." They frowned, clearly worried. "Have you eaten anything? Drank water? Do you need medicine?" She shook her head again, wincing at the movement. "I haven't had much appetite. I tried drinking some water earlier, but it didn't help." "Well, let's get you something now," the roommate insisted, grabbing a glass from the cabinet and filling it with cool water. "Here, sip this slowly." She obeyed, grateful for the gesture, but even swallowing, the liquid felt exhausting. As she set the half-empty glass aside, her gaze drifted to her ankle. The mosquito bite she'd forgotten about was still there, now surrounded by angry redness. It looked irritated, almost infected. Had she scratched it too hard in her sleep? Before, she could dwell on it further. Another wave of dizziness struck. This time it brought nausea with it. She clutched the counter harder, fighting the urge to vomit. Her vision blurred momentarily, and black spots danced before her eyes. Panic bubbled up inside her chest. What was happening to her? Her roommate noticed the change immediately. Hey, sit down," they urged, guiding her to the couch. She collapsed onto the cushions, trembling despite the feverish heat coursing through her veins. Her breathing grew shallow, each inhale requiring more effort than the last. "This isn't right," the roommate murmured, pacing nervously. "We should call someone. A doctor or—" "No hospitals," she interrupted weakly, shaking her head. "I'll be fine. Probably just a bug. Let me rest for a bit." But resting wasn't helping. If anything, she felt worse with each passing minute. Her muscles ached as if she'd run a marathon without training. Her heart pounded erratically, skipping beats that left her lightheaded. And then, without warning, her vision tunneled completely. Everything went dark. The next thing she knew, she was lying on the floor. Her roommate crouched beside her, shouting frantically into a phone. "Unconscious. Please hurry." The words barely registered in her foggy mind. She tried to speak, to tell them she was awake, but her lips wouldn't move. Her limbs refused to respond. All she could do was lie there, trapped in her own body, while fear clawed at her insides. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each second. Paramedics burst through the door moments later, their voices sharp and commanding. Someone slipped an oxygen mask over her face while others strapped her onto a stretcher. Through the haze, she heard snippets of conversation. High fever, possible infection. Words floated around her, meaningless and distant. As they wheeled her out of the apartment, her roommate followed, tears streaming down their face. "You're going to be okay," they whispered, gripping her hand tightly. But she couldn't respond. Darkness closed in again, pulling her under like a riptide. In the ambulance, the paramedics worked quickly, hooking her up to machines that beeped steadily beside her. Lights flashed above her head, blinding and harsh. Somewhere deep inside, she wanted to fight back, to wake up and demand answers. But her body betrayed her, surrendering to whatever illness had taken hold. By the time they reached the hospital, she was completely unresponsive. Doctors swarmed around her gurney, barking orders and running tests. Blood was drawn, IVs inserted, monitors attached. Her roommate hovered anxiously in the background, clutching her belongings and praying silently. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Machines beeped and whirred, nurses rushed in and out, and doctors conferred in hushed tones. Still, she remained unconscious, her fragile form dwarfed by the chaos surrounding her. No one knew what was wrong, not yet, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary fever, and somewhere, hidden beneath layers of medical jargon and uncertainty, lay the answer. An answer tied to a single mosquito bite, now swollen and angry, on her ankle, a clue everyone had overlooked until it was almost too late. The hospital buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet desperation that filled the waiting room. The young woman's roommate sat slumped in a plastic chair, elbows resting on knees, head buried in hands. Around them, fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting a sterile glow over the rows of empty seats. A television mounted high on the wall played a muted news segment about summer health risks, ironic considering the situation. Every now and then, the roommate glanced up. At the clock. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. Each second felt like an eternity. They clutched the woman's phone tightly in their palm, scrolling through photos to distract themselves. Pictures of happier times flashed across the screen. Beach days, birthday celebrations, random selfies taken during lazy afternoons. It was hard to believe that just 2 days ago, she'd been perfectly fine, laughing and enjoying life without a care in the world. Behind the closed doors of the emergency wing, doctors worked tirelessly to piece together what had gone so terribly wrong. Blood tests revealed alarming levels of infection coursing through her veins. Her white blood cell count was skyrocketing, a clear sign her body was fighting something fierce. But what? That was the million-dollar question. Dr. Patel, a seasoned physician with years of experience under his belt, studied the results carefully. Something didn't add up. Fevers this high, coupled with sudden unconsciousness, weren't typical of common illnesses like the flu or even heat stroke. There was more to this puzzle, and he knew it. Could it be meningitis? One of the nurses suggested, jotting down notes on her clipboard. It's possible, Dr. Patel replied thoughtfully, but we need to rule out other causes first. His gaze shifted to the detailed report in front of him. One detail caught his attention, the swollen bite on her ankle. He remembered seeing it when they examined her earlier. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. It looked like any ordinary bug bite. But now, staring at her lab results, doubt crept in. Could this seemingly harmless mark hold the key to solving the mystery? He called for another round of tests, ordering specific screenings for diseases transmitted by insects. Tick-borne illnesses came to mind immediately. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, even rare cases of ehrlichiosis. These conditions could escalate rapidly if left untreated, wreaking havoc on vital organs. Time was of the essence. Meanwhile, back in the waiting room, the roommate couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something crucial had been missed. They replayed the past few days in their head, searching for clues. Then it hit them, the hike. She'd mentioned going on a short nature walk last weekend, somewhere wooded and secluded. She loves being outdoors, the roommate muttered aloud, half to themselves, half hoping someone might hear. She said there were bugs everywhere, lots of mosquitoes, maybe ticks too. A nurse passing by paused mid-step. Ticks? She asked sharply, turning toward the roommate. Did she mention finding any bites? The roommate hesitated, thinking back. Not specifically, but she did say the area was known for them. I mean, who checks every inch of their skin after a hike, right? The nurse nodded grimly before disappearing behind the double doors leading to the ER. Moments later, Dr. Patel emerged, his expression serious but focused. He approached the roommate, pulling up a chair beside them. We're running additional tests based on new information. he explained gently. It's possible your friend contracted something from a tick bite. We won't know for sure until the results come back, but we're treating her as though it's a severe case already. The weight of those words settled heavily in the air. Tick-borne diseases weren't things people casually brushed off. They could be deadly if not caught early enough. The roommates swallowed hard, nodding silently. All they could do now was wait and hope. Back inside the ER, machines continued monitoring the young woman's fragile state. Her breathing remained shallow, supported by oxygen tubes snaking around her face. Her heartbeat fluttered erratically, keeping the medical staff on edge. Fluids dripped steadily into her veins via IV lines, while antibiotics began their slow assault against whatever lurked within her bloodstream. Hours stretched into what felt like days. Finally, the test results arrived. Dr. Patel scanned the pages intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. When he reached the final diagnosis, his shoulders sagged slightly, not in defeat but in acknowledgement of the battle ahead. It's Rocky Mountain spotted fever, he announced to the team. Caused by Rickettsia rickettsii. If untreated, it can lead to organ failure and death. The room fell silent for a brief moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. RMSF was rare but notoriously aggressive. Even with treatment, survival wasn't guaranteed, especially when caught this late. Every second counted. Start high-dose antibiotics immediately, Dr. Patel instructed, and prep her for dialysis if her kidneys start failing. We need to act fast. As orders were carried out, the young woman lay motionless in her hospital bed, oblivious to the frantic efforts surrounding her. Her body fought valiantly against the invading bacteria, but the damage was spreading. Her liver showed signs of strain, her lungs struggled to function properly, and her kidneys teetered on the brink of collapse. Machines beeped urgently, alerting the staff to every dip and spike in her vitals. Outside, night fell once again. The waiting room grew quieter as visitors thinned out, leaving only the roommate and a handful of others enduring the long vigil. Phones buzzed occasionally with updates from concerned friends and family members, but no real answers came. Just questions. Questions that gnawed at everyone's minds. What had started as a simple mosquito bite, a nuisance easily dismissed, had spiraled into a life-threatening crisis. And yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was resilience. The medical team refused to give up. The roommate held on to hope with everything they had. Friends sent messages of support, vowing to keep faith alive. Somewhere deep inside, the young woman's body kept fighting too. Though unconscious, her immune system waged war against the unseen enemy, refusing to surrender without a fight. Whether it would be enough remained unknown. For now, all anyone could do was hold on tight and trust that tomorrow might bring better news. In the end, it wasn't just about medicine or science. It was about humanity. The collective will to save a life, to stand by someone in their darkest hour, and to never stop believing in the possibility of recovery. Because sometimes, that belief is the only thing strong enough to pull someone back from the brink. The diagnosis hit like a punch to the gut. Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The words echoed in the minds of everyone involved, doctors, nurses, and especially her roommate, who sat frozen in shock after hearing the news. It wasn't just the name of the illness that terrified them. It was what it meant. This wasn't something you shrugged off or slept off with rest. It was a battle, a fight for survival. Dr. Patel wasted no time. Antibiotics were rushed into her system through IV lines, flooding her bloodstream with medicine designed to attack the bacteria, causing the infection. But treating RMSF wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. The disease had already wreaked havoc on her body. Her organs were under siege, struggling to keep up with the demands placed on them by both the illness and its treatment. Every beep, from the machines monitoring her vitals, felt like a countdown, each sound marking another moment where things could either improve or spiral further out of control. Her kidneys were failing first. They couldn't filter waste properly anymore, leaving toxins to build up in her body. The medical team prepared her for dialysis, a process that would artificially clean her blood since her kidneys couldn't do the job themselves. The thought of putting her through such an invasive procedure while she lay unconscious weighed heavily on everyone. Yet there was no other choice. Without intervention, her body would shut down completely. As the hours dragged on, the hospital staff worked tirelessly around her bed. Nurses adjusted IV drips, checked oxygen levels, and monitored her heart rate, which continued to fluctuate dangerously. One nurse gently wiped sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering words of encouragement even though she couldn't hear them. "You're strong," the nurse murmured softly. "Keep fighting." Her roommate stayed glued to their seat in the waiting room, pacing occasionally when anxiety became too much to bear. Friends called throughout the night, offering support, but unable to provide answers. Each conversation ended the same way. "We're just waiting. Waiting for improvement. Waiting for stability. Waiting to see if she'd pull through." By morning, fatigue etched deep lines into the roommate's face. They hadn't slept. Not really. Every time they closed their eyes, images of her lying helpless in that hospital bed haunted them. What if this was it? What if she didn't wake up? Questions swirled endlessly, unanswered and relentless. Back in the ER, progress came slowly, if at all. Her fever remained stubbornly high despite the antibiotics coursing through her veins. Her lungs labored to draw breath, forcing doctors to increase the oxygen supply. Machines beeped louder, more insistently, signaling yet another complication. Her liver showed signs of distress, adding another layer of concern to an already dire situation. But amidst the chaos, tiny glimmers of hope began to emerge. Her white blood cell count started to drop slightly, indicating that the antibiotics might finally be gaining ground against the infection. Her heartbeat, though still irregular, steadied just enough to offer a sliver of optimism. These small victories weren't miracles, but they were enough to fuel the determination of everyone working to save her life. Dr. Patel visited the waiting room again later that day, his expression softer than before but still guarded. He explained the latest developments carefully, choosing his words with precision. "She's responding to the treatment," he said, "but it's going to take time. Her body has been through a lot, and recovery won't happen overnight." The roommate nodded, clutching the arms of the chair tightly. "Will she wake up?" they asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to say," Dr. Patel admitted honestly. "Her brain activity is stable, which is a good sign. But we can't predict exactly when, or if, she'll regain consciousness. All we can do is continue giving her the best care possible and hope her body responds." Hope. That single word carried so much weight. It was fragile yet unyielding, a thread holding together the frayed edges of fear and uncertainty. For now, it was all they had. Days turned into a week. The young woman remained unconscious, her condition teetering precariously between life and death. Machines continued their ceaseless symphony of beeps and whirs, keeping her alive while her body fought its invisible war. Her roommate rarely left the hospital, spending most of their time sitting beside her bed, talking to her even though she couldn't respond. Sometimes they read aloud from her favorite books or played music she loved, hoping somehow it would reach her. Visiting hours blurred together. Friends brought food, shared stories, and tried to lighten the mood, but the underlying tension never fully dissipated. Everyone knew how close she was to slipping away, and yet, every day she held on was a victory, a testament to her strength and the dedication of those caring for her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon outside the hospital windows, something remarkable happened. A nurse noticed slight movement beneath her eyelids. At first it seemed like nothing more than a twitch, something involuntary. But then her fingers stirred faintly atop the blanket covering her. The nurse froze, staring intently at her face. Could it be? "Doctor," she called urgently, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ICU. Within moments, Dr. Patel arrived, followed closely by the roommate, who had been alerted by the sudden commotion. They watched anxiously as her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. She blinked several times, confusion clouding her features. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. Tubes snaked across her body, connecting her to machines that beeped steadily nearby. Panic flickered in, her expression as she tried to speak only managing a hoarse croak. "It's okay," the roommate reassured her quickly, stepping closer to the bed. "You're safe. You're in the hospital." Her lips moved again, forming silent questions. Tears welled in her eyes as reality crashed over her. Where she was, why she was here, and how close she'd come to losing everything. Exhaustion overwhelmed her almost immediately, and her eyes drifted shut once more. But she'd woken up. That alone was monumental. For the first time in days, the atmosphere in the hospital shifted. The tension that had gripped everyone loosened ever so. Slightly. There was still a long road ahead, weeks, maybe months of recovery, but she'd taken the first step. She'd fought her way back from the edge, proving that even in the darkest moments, resilience could shine through. As the night wore on, the roommate sat quietly beside her bed, holding her hand. Machines continued their rhythmic chorus, but now they sounded less ominous, more like a lifeline tethering her to the world. Outside, stars twinkled faintly in the sky, casting a gentle glow over the city below. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and often unfair, but it was also beautiful. And for tonight, at least, hope burned brighter than fear. Waking up was like breaking through the surface of water after being submerged for too long. The young woman's first moments of consciousness were hazy, fragmented, and overwhelming. Her mind struggled to make sense of where she was and what had happened. Everything felt distant, sounds muffled, movements sluggish, thoughts jumbled. But one thing stood out sharply: the warmth of a hand holding hers. Her roommate sat beside her bed, gripping her fingers tightly, as if afraid to let go. Their eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but relief washed over their face when they realized she was awake again. "Hey," they whispered softly, leaning closer. "You're back." She blinked slowly, trying to focus on the voice. Her throat felt dry and scratchy, making it hard to speak. When she finally managed a raspy, "Where?" her voice cracked, startling even herself. "You're in the hospital," the roommate explained gently. "Do you remember anything?" She shook her head slightly, wincing at the effort. Memories came in flashes: a fever, dizziness, blackness. But nothing clear or coherent. All she knew was that something wasn't right with her body. Every inch of her felt heavy, weak, and foreign, like she'd been away from herself for a long time. The doctors arrived soon after, eager to assess her condition. Dr. Patel led the team, his calm demeanor offering some comfort despite the seriousness of the situation. He asked her simple questions: her name, the year, how she felt, and listened carefully to her responses. Though her answers were slow and slurred, they signaled progress. Her brain was still functioning, even if it was groggy and confused. Over the next few days, recovery became a painstaking process. Machines continued monitoring her vitals, though fewer alarms blared now than before. Nurses adjusted IV lines, checked oxygen levels, and administered medications regularly. Physical therapy sessions began almost immediately, even though she could barely lift her arms without help. Simple tasks like sitting upright required immense effort, leaving her exhausted and frustrated. At first, she couldn't understand why everything felt so difficult. Why did moving hurt so much? Why couldn't she remember basic things about herself? The truth was sobering. Her body had endured weeks of trauma, both from the illness and the treatments used to combat it. Muscles had weakened from disuse. Nerves had been damaged by toxins, and her immune system was still rebuilding itself. Recovery wouldn't happen overnight, or even in a matter of weeks. It would take months, possibly longer, to regain strength and independence. Her roommate stayed by her side throughout it all, acting as both cheerleader and anchor. They brought small reminders of home, photos, books, music, to keep her spirits up during the toughest moments. Sometimes they read aloud to her, their steady voice cutting through the monotony of hospital life. Other times, they simply held her hand, offering silent support when words failed. Friends visited too, bringing laughter and stories from outside the sterile walls of the hospital. One friend played guitar softly in the corner of her room, filling the space with soothing melodies. Another shared jokes that made her smile faintly, even when laughing hurt. These little acts of kindness reminded her there was a world beyond her current struggle, a world waiting for her return, but not every moment was hopeful. There were setbacks that tested her resolve, days when physical therapy left her sobbing in frustration because she couldn't move the way she wanted. Nights when nightmares plagued her sleep, replaying fragments of memories she didn't fully understand, and mornings when despair crept in, whispering cruel doubts about whether she'd ever feel normal again. During those low points, her roommate never wavered. They reminded her of how far she'd already come, from lying unconscious in a hospital bed to opening her eyes and fighting back. "You've got this," they'd say firmly, brushing tears from her cheeks. One step at a time. Slowly but surely, improvements began to show. She regained enough strength to sit up unassisted, then stand with support. Speech therapy helped her articulate words more clearly, while occupational therapy taught her to perform daily tasks like brushing her teeth and feeding herself. Each milestone, no matter how small, felt monumental. Progress was slow, yes, but it was undeniable. As weeks turned into months, she started to piece together what had happened. Doctors explained the diagnosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and how close she'd come to losing her life. Learning about the severity of her illness hit her hard. A single mosquito bite had spiraled into a near-death experience, forcing her to confront mortality in ways she never imagined. It was humbling, terrifying, and eye-opening all at once. Yet through it all, gratitude grew within her. Gratitude for the medical team who refused to give up on her, for her roommate who sacrificed so much to stay by her side, for friends who showed up, even when they didn't know what to say, and most of all, for her own resilience, the stubborn determination to survive against all odds. By the time she was discharged from the hospital, autumn had settled over the town. Leaves crunched underfoot as she took her first steps outside in months, leaning heavily on a cane for support. Fresh air filled her lungs, crisp and invigorating. The world seemed brighter somehow, sharper in its details. Every sound, smell, and sensation felt like a gift she hadn't appreciated before. Homecoming was bittersweet. Familiar surroundings brought comfort, but also highlighted how much had changed. Walking from room to room tired her quickly, and everyday activities required planning and patience. Still, she embraced the challenge, determined to rebuild her life piece by piece. Her journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But she carried with her a newfound appreciation for the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. What had once seemed impossible now felt achievable, one small victory at a time. And those scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. They served as reminders of just how far she'd come. Months had passed since she left the hospital, but life was still far from normal. The young woman stood on her porch one evening, leaning against the railing as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cooler now, carrying the crisp scent of autumn leaves. She watched the golden light fade into twilight, feeling a mix of emotions: gratitude for being alive, sadness for what she'd lost, and determination to keep moving forward. Her recovery hadn't been easy. Each day was a balancing act between progress and setbacks. Some mornings she woke up energized, ready to tackle physical therapy exercises or take short walks around the block. Other days, fatigue weighed her down so heavily that getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. But she refused to give up. Every step, no matter how small, brought her closer to reclaiming her independence. The bite on her ankle had healed, leaving behind a faint scar, a permanent reminder of the ordeal she'd endured. It wasn't just the mark on her skin that lingered. The experience had changed her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Simple pleasures she once took for granted, feeling the breeze on her face, hearing birds chirp in the morning, now carried deeper meaning. Life felt fragile, precious, and fleeting. She vowed never to overlook its beauty again. One thing became clear during her recovery: she wanted to make a difference. Her brush with death had opened her eyes to how little people knew about diseases like Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Most wouldn't think twice about a mosquito bite or a tick lurking in tall grass. Yet those tiny creatures could carry illnesses capable of wreaking havoc on the human body. Determined to raise awareness, she began sharing her story online. Bitten. First, it was just a few posts on social media, photos of her journey along with captions explaining what had happened. She talked about the symptoms she experienced, the treatments she underwent, and the lessons she learned. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out, thanking her for shedding light on something they'd never considered before. Many shared their own stories of illness or survival, creating a sense of community she hadn't expected. Encouraged by the feedback, she decided to take things further. With the help of local health organizations, she organized workshops and informational sessions at community centers. These events focused on educating people about insect-borne illnesses, prevention methods, and the importance of seeking medical attention for unusual symptoms. She distributed pamphlets filled with tips, how to properly check for ticks after spending time outdoors, which repellents worked best, and when to consult a doctor if a bite seemed infected. Her efforts didn't stop there. She partnered with schools to teach children about staying safe outdoors. Using simple language and engaging visuals, she explained why wearing long sleeves in wooded areas mattered and how to spot early signs of illness. Kids listened intently, asking questions and promising to remind their parents to check for ticks. Watching them absorb the information gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As winter approached, she found herself reflecting on everything she'd been through. The holidays were bittersweet. Family gatherings reminded her of how close she'd come to missing these moments altogether. There were times when tears welled up unexpectedly, not out of sadness, but out of sheer gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. Conversations with loved ones often turned to her experience, and while retelling the story sometimes brought back painful memories, it also reinforced her commitment to spreading awareness. Her roommate remained a constant source of support throughout her recovery. They attended events with her, helped manage logistics, and offered encouragement whenever doubt crept in. Their bond had grown stronger through the ordeal, transforming into something unshakable. Together, they celebrated milestones big and small, from completing a full day without needing rest to walking longer distances without assistance. By spring, she felt like a new person, not because she'd returned to who she used to be, but because she'd grown into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She still faced challenges. Some days were harder than others, but she met them head-on, armed with resilience and hope. On the anniversary of her hospitalization, she stood on the same porch where it all began. The world looked different now, brighter somehow. She wore long sleeves and pants despite the warm weather, a habit she'd adopted since learning firsthand how dangerous even a single bite could be. A bottle of insect repellent sat nearby, ready for use. She smiled softly as she gazed at the horizon, remembering how carefree she'd been that summer evening months ago. Back then, mosquitoes had been nothing more than an annoyance. Now, they symbolized something greater, a reminder of life's fragility and the importance of vigilance. Life had taught her hard lessons, but it had also shown her the power of perseverance, love, and community. She carried those lessons with her every day, letting them guide her actions and decisions. Though she couldn't change the past, she could shape the future, not just for herself, but for others too. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, she stepped back inside, closing the door behind her. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new chances to make a difference. For now, she was content knowing she'd survived and thrived against all odds.